Hey all. So, welcome back for another Spotlight with Context, and today we are going to be talking about Moondragon, who is a really exciting addition to the skill class. I am really looking forward to having her around, and spoilers, part of it is because she's very good against Scorpion, and that makes me happy. So, we'll talk more about that as we go. I didn't include the stats here, but I will just say her prestige is, if I remember correctly, exactly equal with Ant-Man Future, so that puts her in the top 20. Turns out Kate didn't last there for long. But yeah, it's good prestige. It's not amazing prestige. Enough said. So moving on to strengths, the biggest one is that she has a ton of energy typed burst damage, like an absolute ton of it. It still feels pretty skill, despite the fact that not a lot of skill champions have energy, because it does scale with her critical damage, so that part is still there. And yeah, she'll just do really nice big red numbers. Think kind of like Massacre, but without the damage over time part. Very fun to play. And she also has some really interesting resistances. She takes less damage from and benefits from being inflicted with bleeds, poisons, power stings, and degen, and that's again extremely helpful. So science has quite a bit of poison and power sting and a little bit of degen, but that degen is also going to come up on nodes as well. The one thing to mention here, I'll get it out of the way, I'll probably mention it again later, is that this resistance does not apply to masteries, and so she does not take less damage from the poison from Liquid Courage. This will be bugged on release, just because tech that was working broke, and then we had to fix it again, but just keep that in mind if you see any videos of her going absolutely nuts with the recoil masteries. Still, these are really, really good against somebody like Spider Ham or Scorpion, again, like I said, because on defense, his default sting type is poison, and this will answer that. And then she also has critical incinerates. Personally, I'm not sure I would have called this her primary strength because it's only on the special 3, but it is pretty sweet, especially if you've seen the special 3 animation, which is literally the Dragon of the Moon. But I will also call out she's quite good against evaders, which comes in handy a lot for a skill champ. So, moving on to weaknesses, she is immune to reversed controls, but not to anything else. She has those resistances, but if the damage is really starting to stack up, she's still going to feel it, because she's not outright immune, and she is relatively squishy, so any of that damage that does get through, she is going to feel. She also does very much rely on energy damage. And so while she can reduce the opponent's energy resistance enough to get around a lot of sources of it, she is still going to feel it because it is going to factor into the equation. And if you're fighting somebody like Rintra, you are going to do noticeably less damage. And then lastly, she is fairly risky. The thing is that she doesn't necessarily need to be. There are ways to play her that are less risky, but there's really no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you want to get the most damage out of her, if you want her to really give you those big numbers or that high speed in battlegrounds, you're going to have to do some fancy stuff. I think she can still be helpful, especially in some of her target matchups like Scorpion, without doing the really high risk stuff, but you're going to have to play in a particular way. So moving on to abilities, right up front we have immune to reverse controls. Now this is the full immunity. This isn't like just psychic shielding. This is actually anywhere you see reversed controls, up to and including Eternity of Pain Thanos, she will ignore that. So nice little piece of utility right away, especially in the skill class, which doesn't have a ton of this. And always, she reduces the potency of incoming bleed, power sting, degen, and poisons, like we said, from champions and quest buffs. So that distinction is to specify she does not reduce the potency of poisons from masteries, meaning Liquid Courage, and if we make a striker in the future that applies one of these effects, she will not take less damage from those either, because a striker is not a champion or quest buff. And also note that this is effects, not just debuffs. This will apply to passives, which is most important for the power stings and especially the degens. If you are facing a node that has passive degen, she will take less damage from that. Now, probably the most important mechanic in her kit is her Mind Blasts. Everything else keys off of this, ramps with this, benefits this. This is the thing that you really want to understand fully. So, Mind Blasts are triggered when interrupting heavy attacks. So, the single hit that interrupts the heavy attack, or hitting the opponent's block with the first medium or light. So, your first 2 hits into their block. But they don't trigger on well-timed blocks, which is obviously important because this means that a defending Moondragon is not going to trigger a Mind Blast into your block when you parry her. You also get a Mind Blast on an entire combo if that combo starts by either intercepting your opponent or by interrupting their medium or light attack. So, interrupting their medium is usually going to be the same as intercepting. This will also look for their second medium, so if your opponent throws a combo ender into your block and you respond before they're done with that animation, that will work, same as with somebody like Absorbing Man. But because this also works on lights, this allows you to sidestep into these combos. You can dash back and tap light as your opponent is coming in. And even though that's no longer a true intercept, it does count as an interrupt for this ability. And so you can still get your full combo of Mind Blasts. This does sometimes rely on you switching up your combo and doing like a light, 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 medium, medium instead of a medium, light, 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 medium. But as long as you're flexible enough to do that, this is a really good way to get extra mileage out of Moondragon. Additionally, as was called out in Deep Dive, there is the possibility of hitting into your opponent's block and pausing just long enough for them to drop block and come in at you, and then interrupting them there. Because if they are trying to attack you, thinking that you are open and vulnerable, well, they are going to be doing that with a medium or a light, basically always. And you striking them counts as interrupting those attacks, allows you to land a full combo of Mind Blasts. Now, from hitting into their block, you're probably already landed your medium, but that's okay because then it could just be like your first light that interrupts them, and then you get the rest of the combo. That's still a full 5 Mind Blasts. So you're going to want to experiment with what feels best to you, but if you struggle with straight up intercepting and backdrafting, my recommendation for this would be start with interrupting heavy attacks and hitting your opponent's block, and then if you can specifically get comfortable sidestepping against opponents where that is possible, then add that into the mix. So Mind Blasts do a burst of energy damage and grant Moondragon some power. So she is going to gain more power than normal as long as you are doing this, which is great, allows her to cycle through to more specials. This is kind of an interesting mechanic on a skill champion because they don't normally get ability power, but this is ability power specifically from you intercepting and hitting into block and doing the thing you're supposed to do, so it's kind of cool how that works out. Now obviously the immediate impact of Mind Blasts is that burst of energy damage, but the other thing they're going to help you do is build your Psionic Charges because you gain 1 whenever you trigger a Mind Blast. You are also going to gain a charge every 0.75 seconds while suffering from one of those same effects that she gains resistance to. So if you are fighting somebody like Scorpion and he applies a poison through your block, you're going to take less damage from it. You are also going to start supercharging your Psionic Charges just from having that poison live on you. And then for every Psionic Charge you have, you get extra critical damage rating. Now the reason you care about gaining those Psionic Charges is that when you get to 20 of them, you enter Psionic Transcendence, where you will purify all debuffs, so that helps get rid of any poisons, power stings, etc. that are still on you, and then you get 15 seconds of this state. It can get longer, we'll get to how, but base duration 15 seconds. You will also gain additional charges for each debuff purified. So if you're fighting somebody like Null and have 15 of those Living Abyss debuffs on yourself and you enter Psionic Transcendence, at 20, you're going to bump right up to 35. You're also going to immediately inflict 5 energy vulnerability debuffs on the opponent so that your Mind Blasts do that much more damage. And if they have energy resistance, you're going to start cutting through it. Very helpful for those science characters like Mr. Fantastic or Sandman. But note that these vulnerability debuffs have a max stack of 25. And that is important because as you continue to gain psionic charges, either from having more poisons, bleeds, etc. on you, or from continuing to inflict mind blasts, you will inflict more of these energy vulnerability debuffs. So in that same example against Null, you purify 15 debuffs on entering Transcendence, you jump from 20 to 35 charges, 35 charges. Just from entering the mode, you inflict 5 energy vulnerabilities. From gaining those 15 charges, you inflict another 15, so you're up to 20. So if you can make sure to purify some debuffs as you enter this, you benefit in a big way. While in Transcendence, you reduce the potency of those same effects that much further by another 50%. So they're down by 30% at all times. While you're in Transcendence, they are reduced by 80%. So you're only taking a fifth damage from bleed, poison, power sting, and degen. Obviously, you're still taking some damage. That's not the most fun, but this will put a lot of effects within willpower range and allow you to take basically nothing from them or even be net positive. You are also, while they're on you, going to continue to automatically gain psionic charges and therefore continue to automatically put energy vulnerabilities on your opponent. While she's in this mode, her hits cannot be evaded at all. It's pretty quick to get up into this mode, and so I really feel like she is a pretty potent evade counter, especially if your opponent needs any time to ramp up. So somebody like Scorpion, like I mentioned, is a really good target for this because it's not that hard to be in Transcendence by the time he gets Scorpion Sense active, or especially by the time he tries to the second time. And so that's really, really helpful. Transcendence also pauses during the opponent's special attacks and then for 2 seconds whenever a psionic charge is gained. So all of the things that give you psionic charges stay active while Moondragon is in Transcendence. So if you're suffering from any of these mentioned effects and gaining charges over time, that will pause Transcendence extremely reliably. And as you continue to inflict Mind Blasts from hitting the opponent's block, from interrupting their heavy attacks, or from intercepting them, you are again going to continue to pause Transcendence. So like I said, if you're not comfortable intercepting, often you are able to do this by just baiting heavies, interrupting those, tapping the opponent's block a fair amount. You're probably not going to keep 100% uptime on Transcendence the way you would if you were intercepting, but you can definitely stretch that 15 seconds out a good bit. And then when Transcendence does end, you lose all charges and all energy vulnerabilities. But until it ends, you don't lose any of them. So you can stay at 25 energy vulnerabilities and 40 charges, which remember gives you extra critical damage rating, for a very, very long time if you stay on top of your pauses. When I was playtesting Moondragon, once I got into Transcendence, I didn't lose it in most of the fights I took with her. And so that is kind of how I would evaluate her. Don't think about Transcendence as a window that will close. Think about it as a state that you are trying to stretch for the rest of the fight. Because in a lot of the matchups you want to use her for, you will be able to, and you will be richly rewarded for doing so. So, moving on to the special one, After the final hit, gain 3 psionic charges, period, and begin channeling to gain up to 6 more. And to allow you to channel after the final hit, basic attacks are going to miss for 3.1 seconds. So, a couple things about this. I've seen some comparisons to Professor X. The channeling is obviously like that. Personally, I think of this more as Strife, where he throws the special one and then it helps him ramp. He wants the opponent to hit into him, and then he is going to intercept them or heavy them or otherwise punish them for hitting into him. That's what Moondragon feels like. Additionally, you have to actually perform the attack. And so if you block, if you dash back, if you hit the opponent, that cancels the channeling, but you still have the miss. You can safely throw a heavy. You don't have to worry about losing the miss as you enter the heavy charge animation, which was a question I did get on stream. The special 2 is going to be your big damage payout. All hits do what looks like not a huge amount of energy damage, except that it's multiplied by Moondragon's critical damage multiplier, which, reminder, is going to be boosted for every psionic charge you have, and because this is energy damage, it's going to be magnified by energy vulnerability debuffs on the opponent. Plus, as a bonus, pauses Psionic Transcendence. This gets absolutely nutty. So her big yellow numbers are solid because she has so much crit damage rating from Psionic Transcendence, but the real payoff here is that the red numbers are absolutely nuts when you're playing her right. And because they don't require her to crit, they are reliable. Her special 2 is a really big source of damage, and it is incredibly fun. So the special 3 is, as you've seen in the deep dive, this is the dragon incinerating the opponent. That's why it inflicts an incinerate. It's not the strongest incinerate in the world, but it lasts a good long time. And reminder that incinerate removes perfect block chance and decreases block proficiency, and is therefore pretty helpful for a character where you are going to be hitting into the opponent's block a good chunk of the time. Additionally, this is energy damage, gets magnified by the energy vulnerabilities. And then if Transcendence is active, this becomes a critical incinerate passive, and so it gets multiplied by all of that crit damage you have from being in Psionic Transcendence and having a minimum of 20 charges to boost this. It's a pretty potent incinerate when it's a passive. Plus, again, multiplied by energy vulnerabilities. And then for the duration of this incinerate, which is 25 seconds, Psionic Transcendence is paused. So this is kind of your easy mode button. I talked about this a little bit with Absorbing Man as well, that part of the purpose of his special 3 was to be an easy mode, where you throw it and you don't have to worry about upkeep for a little bit, you just hit the opponent and it does great things. That's kind of what Moondragon's special 3 is. If you are having trouble doing the intercepts with her, get any Mind Blasts you can, right? Hit into the opponent's block with your medium light, punish their heavies, get an intercept here or there if you can, but you can definitely build to 20 charges around the time that you get to your special 3, and then hit into their block a couple times to take yourself over the line to 20 of these charges, enter Psionic Transcendence, immediately throw the special 3, place that giant incinerate passive on the opponent, and then you have 25 seconds to ramp at your leisure without worrying about pauses at all. You just get to keep hitting the opponent, work your way back up to a special 2, and throw it probably at max ramp, even without having to do any of her intercept stuff. So for Battlegrounds, she is much, much faster if you intercept, and you're going to be using the special 2, you're going to ignore the special 3. But if you're not comfortable with her skill ask, or if you're using her in more complex content where it's spooky for other reasons, the special 3 is your friend. She also has a pre-fight ability. She starts with 1 charge of it, and she gains another charge every time an opponent is defeated by her, up to 3, and she can spend this to give somebody else 3 of these Dragon of the Moon passives, and basically every time your opponent or the node tries to reverse her teammate's controls, one passive is removed and they are immune to it. So if you're fighting the Grandmaster where your controls are going to get reversed over and over again, this is not super helpful. If you're very good at fighting the Grandmaster and you think that you can get through that phase without needing more than 3 immunities to reverse controls, then this is amazingly helpful for you. But I think this is especially important for something like fighting Null, where you think you can get around most of the corruptions, but you'd like to have that insurance so that if he throws a special one and you can't cancel it out, sure, he goes unblockable and unstoppable, but at least you didn't accidentally run into his blade because reverse controls triggered at exactly the wrong time as you were trying to get away from something. So it's really nice insurance in that vein. Her signature ability only applies while Psionic Transcendence is active, but during that, her heavy attack is much more likely to be a critical hit while under a bar of power, which means that it combos especially well with her special one, which remember I said is very similar to Strife's, and that it gives you that miss for an opening for the heavy right after you throw it. And heavy attacks are going to either give an indefinite energy vulnerability debuff, or they can trigger a Mind Blast. So the energy vulnerability debuff is nice, ramps you further. You can do that just by throwing a special one. The opponent comes in, you punish it. But if they have a bar of power, and you use the special one to push them, to try and get them to throw it, they throw it, you have to dex because the miss doesn't work on specials, but then you punish that special with the heavy, then you get the Mind Blast, which is going to give you another energy vulnerability, but is also going to pause Psionic Transcendence and allow you to keep going. Plus, the part that matters, even if you never use her heavy attack, while Psionic Transcendence is active, special attacks are passively unblockable. This is, again, particularly nice on a character that can ramp by hitting into block, because you can go and do medium light, throw your special, and you don't have to worry about getting an opening at all. You don't have to worry about them dashing back, you don't have to worry about them dexing, you can just have them exactly where you want them, medium light into their block, special. It's very nice. And then we're already into her synergies with Moon Knight and a couple other people that probably have something to do with the moon. Moondragon gains 5 Psionic Charges whenever Psionic Transcendence ends, so you have to earn the first one, but then after that it's easier to get back into them. And Moon Knight gets power on critical hits while under 2 bars. With Mantis, she has Psycho Mantis, which is obviously a fantastic gaming reference. And Moondragon is going to get energy resistance while Psionic Transcendence is not active. Not super impactful for her, but definitely going to have some uses. And Mantis is going to get physical resistance for 6 seconds when she is struck for the first time in a fight. Again, not huge, but Mantis and Moondragon are both relatively squishy characters that ask you to be risky. An extra element of safety for both of them is a nice synergy. And then you have the Bald and the Beautiful with these 4 other bald characters, giving you an energy resistance passive while you're attacking. This is not going to keep you alive on hazard shift or anything, but it is enough energy resistance that you are definitely going to be able to blitz through some challenges that would otherwise cause you problems. Karate Mike did a really good example of this by fighting Bishop with Luke Cage in the deep dive. I could also see fighting Terrax being a really good use for this, because it's going to allow you to be more aggressive and hit into him while eating into Rockfield's damage pretty heavily. Again, it's not going to let you win a ton of fights you would have lost, but it's definitely going to be some nice insurance in allowing all of these characters to be a little more flexible. And then finally we have this one with Iron Fist. Moondragon is going to get a Fury passive when she's hitting into the opponent's block with basics, and this feeds really well into what I've talked about a few times, where you hit into their block, you do medium light, throw a special. It doesn't matter which special that is, getting a Fury for it is going to be great. Additionally, specifically for the special 2, and really also the special 3, we talked about how well they scale with critical damage rating and with the energy vulnerabilities. Well, those are two different axes than attack rating. And so giving Moondragon a 20% attack rating is going to be 20% more damage on top of those other effects. It's not going to get lost in the mix. You are really going to feel the 20%. And then for Iron Fist, you get a heavy proficiency passive, which is going to allow your next heavy to get up to 60% extra attack rating. Kind of cool. Obviously, Iron Fist is in need of an update, so that side of it is not as important. But yeah, that's Moondragon. I am really excited about her. It takes a while to get used to the Mind Blasts, but as I talked about, there are a few less intense ways to access them. You don't have to focus on intercepts all the time. She's very similar to Absorbing Man in that way. There is a lower skill way to play her, and you just don't quite access the ceiling the same way, but she can still very much be worth it. And then you also have access to the Special 3 that allows you, when you have a bit more time, to still get pretty darn close to that ceiling. And along the way, she just does so much damage and does a really good job against some very annoying science defenders. So I cannot wait to add her to my roster. She is a blast to play, pun somewhat intended, and she is very, very good. So let me know in the comments what you're thinking about her, any questions or concerns in particular, and I will see y'all tomorrow with the Adam Warlock one. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and take care.